Have you ever felt trapped by a rule you just couldn't understand? Or maybe you found yourself waiting for a future that ends up just consuming your present? Well, today we're going to dive into 3 modern parables that feel like they were written by Franz Kafka himself. And each one is a brilliant, kind of unsettling look into the absurd traps we build for ourselves.
So, first things first, what does that word even mean? Kafka asks. Well, it's that unique, dreadful feeling of being caught in some bizarre, illogical system. You know the one, where you're totally powerless against these nonsensical rules. It's a world of distorted reality and bureaucratic nightmares, and honestly, it's the perfect lens for the stories we're about to get into.
Okay, so picture this. This single letter shows up at your door. No time, no place, not a single detail about what it's for. Just a command that you can't possibly follow, but somehow you feel like you absolutely have to obey it. This is exactly where our first story begins.
Right, our first parable. It's all about a mysterious summons that promises a future so important, it ends up completely wiping out the present.
The weirdest thing is the power this letter has. It's totally vague, but by using the man's full, private name, it feels official. It feels real. His friends, of course, tell him, just ignore it, it's probably a mistake. But he can't. He dedicates himself to being ready, literally canceling his own life, so he doesn't miss this one completely unknown appointment. And the cost? It's staggering. What starts as just a little bit of caution spirals into a full-blown obsession. Days turn into weeks, weeks into years, all just sacrificed. His whole world shrinks down to the size of his apartment. His entire life becomes one long, anxious wait for a call that, you guessed it, never comes. And then, on his deathbed, one final letter arrives. It is the ultimate bureaucratic punchline. After an entire lifetime spent waiting, watching, being ready, he finds out he missed the appointment anyway. He was always one day late. So that just leaves you wondering, right? If he was always ready, always waiting right by the door, what on earth did he miss? What was this so-called appointment he gave up everything for? And here's the heartbreaking truth. The appointment was his life. It was the one happening all around him the whole time. The friends he stopped seeing, the world just outside his door. It's kind of like the anxiety of modern productivity culture in a nutshell, isn't it? In preparing endlessly for this perfect future, he missed out on the present entirely. And this theme of self-sabotage, well, it takes a very different form in our next story. Okay, our next parable gives us a totally internal paradox. This one's about a man trapped by a personal law that's just impossible to obey, because the very act of trying to obey it guarantees he's going to break it. The whole setup is perfectly absurd. An official-looking notice arrives, telling a man that he's now subject to a unique personal law. He has to follow it perfectly, but he's not allowed to know what it says. I mean, how could you possibly navigate that? So, get this. The logic of this law is just an impossible loop. There's a secret rule just for you. You only find out what the rule is at the exact moment you violate it. And the punishment? It's not a fine, it's not jail time, it's just gaining the knowledge of the rule you just broke, which of course makes it impossible to ever follow it authentically again. It's a perfect trap. So, faced with this impossible situation, what does he do? He becomes completely paralyzed. To avoid breaking this unknown rule, he does almost nothing. He shrinks his life down, avoids making any decisions, he just hides from action, hoping that if he does nothing, he can't possibly do anything wrong. And here is the devastating irony. The officials finally show up to inform him that he has, in fact, violated his law. And what was the rule? The rule was that he must live a full, courageous, risky life. His very attempt to obey the law by being cautious was the ultimate violation of it. And this right here reveals the core philosophical trap. The law demanded authentic, spontaneous living, but once he knew that was the requirement, any attempt to be spontaneous would be calculated, which means it's not authentic. He's trapped, no matter what. You know, ultimately, this is the trap of self-consciousness. Think about it. It's like when someone tells you to act natural. The moment you try, you fail. This is the root of imposter syndrome, right? The man's hyper-awareness of the need to be authentic made true authenticity totally impossible for him.
All right, our final story brings this whole conflict right back home. The obstacle isn't some litter from the outside or a law, it's one we create and sustain all by ourselves, just through misdirected effort.
So picture a massive, imposing door. First one man, then a whole crowd, and eventually generations of people dedicate their lives to one single goal: opening it. They organize themselves, they strategize, they build an entire culture around pushing against this one door.
And the dynamic at play here is just so simple and so tragic. All of their effort, their whole culture, is directed into one action: pushing. It never even occurs to them to try the alternative: pulling. One represents force and struggle, the other, surrender and just letting go.
Because, of course, the door opens inward. The harder they pushed, the more firmly they sealed their own fates. Their immense collective effort was the only thing keeping the door shut. Their struggle was the obstacle.
So after generations of all this wasted effort, after they finally discover this simple truth, you'd think they would have learned some profound lesson about problems and solutions, right?
Nope. Tragically, they step through the first door, find a second one, and immediately, without a single moment of hesitation, they start pushing again. They learned the completely wrong lesson, or maybe they learned nothing at all, just doomed to repeat the same struggle forever.
So when you look at these three stories together, what do they really show us? Well, they reveal this kind of labyrinth that we construct for ourselves, where the walls are built from our own assumptions, our own fears, and our own misdirected efforts. We've seen three really distinct traps, and each one reflects a very modern anxiety. The appointment, it warns against a kind of hustle culture that sacrifices the present for some imaginary future. The law shows how trying to be perfect can fuel this paralyzing fear of failure. And the door, well, that's a parable for burnout, showing how our own brute force effort can become the very thing holding us back.
And all of this brings us to one final question. You see, these stories aren't just abstract ideas. They're mirrors. They're asking us to look at our own lives and wonder, what are we waiting for? What impossible rules are we trying to follow? And what doors in our lives are we pushing against with all our might that might, just might, open inward?